Chapter 317. My answer is timing. Handler Actual. This is Dagger 1-3. Stand by for transmission. Oscar glanced over as his squad mate operated their beacon. Ever since they had been rolled out, they no longer had to be so careful about communicating within enemy territory. They could outright bypass the node networks of a city and drop information straight at the destination. There was no risk of being caught unless there was a sovereign nearby, even in an urban environment like they were in. In the dark basement around him, there were 4 others preparing themselves. Whether it was doing equipment diagnostics, rereading the mission briefings, polishing blades, or doing a few practice exercises, their rituals helped them sharpen up for the mission ahead. They weren't the only ones. Other squads in different locations were doing the same. Unlike most missions, though, the atmosphere was more solemn. Nobody was talking much because they knew what kind of horrors they were about to find. They only had to do it 2 times before, but each time, they died more inside. Oscar knew of some teams that had to be sent to other units due to the trauma, something that only started happening recently. He had heard a rumor that someone had decided to take their own life after a similar mission. So far, it was the only death that Covert Ops had ever sustained, which meant word reached the top, likely falling directly into Commander Cooper's hands. Things changed after that. Their mission schedules were shifted heavily. Some teams got disbanded, and people were disappearing into the medical ward, more than what had normally been 0. Few people ever heard of them after that, and the healers only ever gave vague explanations. Something to do with a new diagnosis of psychological trauma. Oscar didn't blame them. When he tried to think of what he had seen during the last mission of this nature, his mind refused to recall those images. He couldn't remember them, couldn't bring back those feelings and sounds. He knew that wasn't a good thing, and pushing too hard into those thoughts caused him to vomit one time. He took a deep breath. He knew it wouldn't be good to rip open that wound, but he would never back out of the mission. These missions were where they did the greatest good that this world knew. What they suffered was simply the price, and he would always pay it. Oscar checked the time for the 100th time in the past 5 minutes. Then, when the number was on his predetermined mark, he stood up and slipped on his helmet. The HUD bloomed, running through several checks as his vision blinked to life. He saw the others reacting to his movement. The leadership communication network chirped with activity as the other teams came online. Oscar was silent, even though he was team lead. They were already used to not exchanging any words between teams, even on a coordinated mission like this. Sensitive locations like theirs demanded such paranoid precautions. It was why nobody had died yet. Oscar checked the biometrics of his team. Everything was green, everyone was alive. Every team had all their members where they were supposed to be. Seeing that, he rested his hand on his sword, letting out a long breath and speaking. Let's move. The deadline for mission start ticked, and all the teams spiked with activity. Oscar saw his team flicker out of view, camo systems going to full power and obscuring both their figures and aura. Theirs were especially powerful. Even being Authority 10, Oscar couldn't sense a single one of them, which always made him baffled because his suit was able to detect and communicate with them just fine. He didn't think he could ever comprehend the kind of technology those Wonderland nerds devised, especially when it came to the weapons. Some of them made him question whether or not they had demons over there feeding the researchers' ideas. The summoner on their team had one such weapon, a crystal rifle with ammunition clocking in at Authority 9. The enchantments that each bullet was coated with produced nasty penetrator rounds capable of punching through royals like they were fodder monsters before exploding with both shrapnel and fire. It was the single most powerful and expensive weapon among their squad, given to the one with the fastest mind among them, alongside the armor that augmented the summoner's strength rather significantly, and they could keep up with the rest of the team easily. They left the basement and ascended to the city streets beyond. Completely invisible, they were all but to sneak under the noses of all the Nephilim around them. The area they were in was a hotspot for their degenerate practices, the streets coated with blood, some Nephilim killing each other nearby. The city had been mostly corrupted by this point, few humans remaining. Those that did were either in the process of being corrupted, were in line, or were trying to escape with their lives. Those that had attempted to outwardly fight against the Nephilim had been killed some time ago. Many magi had died according to the reports. Tens of thousands, including thousands of teenagers yet to awaken. Oscar could see some corpses hanging from wires strung between buildings, bodies carved beyond recognition, and the skin of the crests flayed off the back of their hands. They bypassed it all, every team converging on multiple different buildings. Oscar led his team down their designated building. They threw open the door, finding just a few Nephilim within and slaughtering them within seconds. Then they headed to a back room, the hidden floor hatch already known about in advance. After pulling it open, they jumped in and started running through the tunnels. They killed anything they came across mercilessly, most enemies being multiple authorities below them, requiring no more from Oscar than a single slash of his sword. The tunnel they traveled down was around half a mile long, winding down further underground and revealing several side rooms along the way. They cleared each one silently before continuing on, leaving behind alarms in case anyone followed. Their progress was swift, and after a few minutes, they came upon their destination. The tunnel opened up into a large cave, within which was a tall temple. Carved pillars, demonic symbols, and trailing stains of blood led into the building. What poured out of it, in turn, was a harrowing auric signature that made Oscar's blood run cold. They hoisted their weapons, stepping into the temple vigilantly, feeling the residual fear and terror wash over their bodies, penetrating their suits, shields, and camouflage. They followed the entrance, finding more Nephilim. They refrained from killing them, Oscar singing the others through various pathways. They mapped out the structure, Oscar's HUD showing the map as it updated in real time. He was only in charge of the frontal portion. The other teams were taking care of the other sections, all of their maps syncing and giving a full overview of the temple. Eventually they found it, the path to the central chamber. After regrouping and giving the command, Oscar coordinated every team and started convoying upon the chamber. They found themselves in front of a large pair of doors, just one of two sets. Oscar met with the other team leader who was to enter with him, two other teams at the other door, waiting on their command. Without further hesitation, the order was given. They placed charges on the doors, which shot out rapid pulses of magic through the enchantments, isolating them, frying them, and disabling them without tripping a single alarm. Then the mute fields went live, all sound cutting out and illusions springing to life around them to mask their entry, simultaneously sending a pulse through the room beyond and highlighting every entity within. They were automatically categorized based their auric and magical signature, giving friendly, enemy, and unknown targets. Once those were in place, the explosive charges went off, blowing open the doors with a clean detonation. Oscar flew into the room, the other two teams doing the same in the instant that his did. With perfect coordination practiced in many other missions within this godforsaken city, all four teams took their targets and swept through them all. Any unknown targets were identified and handled, most of them being enemies, some of them being friendly. There was some resistance from 3 Authority 10 Royals, but they only took several more seconds to kill. With a few well-placed penetrator shots from Oscar's summoner squadmate, and some coordination from the other brigadiers in the other teams, their enemies were put down like the dogs they were. 2 minutes later, Oscar's adrenaline started to simmer down, his eyes and aura scanning every corner as the last enemy fell in a pool of blood. With no feeling of danger and no discernible threats, they seemed to be all clear. He turned his head, seeing a set of barriers flickering around the chamber. The sight of what was behind them made Oscar's breathing pause. The walls, from floor to ceiling, were lined with small metal cages containing children and babies of all ages. There were a dozen of them in the center of the chamber floors as well, but those weren't alive, even if their bodies were still warm. Even more chains hung from the ceiling, barely recognizable corpses hanging by their wrists or ankles. They weren't even old bodies, and yet Oscar couldn't make out their genders, more muscle than skin exposed. He looked for longer than he should have, every neuron in his brain so overstimulated that he couldn't speak. He just kept looking around, at every little horror, every tiny contextual detail that described what had transpired in this chamber. The limbs, the blood, even the stench that broke past their air purification systems, carried by the very aura of this room. Oscar took some deep breaths, using every last ounce of his willpower to try and take control of the situation. He could feel some of his soldiers beginning to crack, start unlocking cages. Healers, start triage and get the worst of them movable. Team 2, establish security. Our enemy won't take much longer to realize something is wrong. Get moving. Oscar engaged them, refusing to let the silence linger any longer, lest they fall too deep into their thoughts. Most of them started running around, locks being slashed or ripped apart so they could pull out the children inside of them. Oscar's suit did a quick count and found 88 live children. They had their work cut out for them. He watched their team summoner start giving an update to their ride out as he helped open cages and locks. They'd have a handful of silent helicopters to transport all these kids out, including a large team of healers on standby when they got back. Over a few more minutes, things went silent again, everyone's heads down as they worked. Oscar's head whipped around when the scream shrilled through the chamber. He found one of the women looking through a door they hadn't noticed before, Oscar sprinting over alongside a few others. He looked through the door, freezing in fear as he gazed upon the mountain of flesh inside this new room. And at its top stood a small tree sprout. His mind tingled when he looked at it despite him being Authority 10. It was only when he was grabbed and yanked away by his summoner that he regained himself. His legs gave out, and he ripped off his helmet, vomiting on the floor. He only took a few seconds to regain himself, the summoner pulling the others out of the doorway before slamming it closed. When Oscar stood up and found others running over, he waved. "Get out of here. Go back and start getting those kids out. That's a fucking order." He didn't realize he had screamed until a couple seconds later, the others turning around slowly and going back to what they were doing. Oscar heaved for air while kneeling, turning to look at his summoner. Bradley was his name. He was holding the woman who had screamed, trying and failing to get her to calm down. She muttered incoherently, trying to slam her head on the floor. Oscar stood and walked over to them. "Did that thing do something to her?" "No, nothing. That thing looked like a death shrine, but it's just a sprout. We'll have to destroy it, but it's not powerful enough to do anything to her. She's just..." "Yeah." Oscar nodded, feeling his consciousness wavering. He had only looked at it for several seconds, and yet his mind still flashed with those images of teeth, nails, hair, bones, and whatever else had been mixed into that unholy creation. Oscar didn't want to fathom what they were trying to do. He looked at the woman. She was from another team, but he knew her name was Andrea. She continued to mutter to herself, sobbing within her helmet uncontrollably. Oscar couldn't help but think that it was good she didn't have children of her own. Nobody within these covert teams had any, only a few having spouses. This was why. Eventually, Bradley brought out a device and tapped it a few times before placing it against her helmet. "I need to override her suit. She's having a breakdown. I'll give you my authority." Oscar gave him his clearance. Only a team lead could give permission to do so. After the exchange, Bradley punched in the command. Andrea's suit injected a sleep potion, and gradually she passed out, unmoving. "I'll take care of her." Andrea's team leader walked over, picking her up. Oscar nodded and looked around. The other teams were loading the children into wagons. They couldn't possibly carry them all. After making sure they would survive the return trip and the worst of them were taken care of, they started preparing. "Everyone fall in. Team 2, scout out our path and bring down the birds. Team 3 and 4, start moving our cargo. We'll bring up the rear." Oscar gave the command, Bradley sending the signal to their ride out. Right after, Bradley turned to him. "Sir." We got word from command. They want us to bring in that sprout. That tree at the top of that mountain of flesh. Do they really expect us to climb it and pull it out?" "Yes, sir." The order came directly from the commander. Fuck. Oscar cringed. Not at the fact that this command couldn't be disobeyed, but that he'd have to enter that room again instead of just leveling it. Bradley sighed. "I'll grab it, sir. Just in case. We don't know what kind of psychic afflictions it might try to hit you with." Oscar didn't respond, just looking at his summoner and silently nodding. Bradley walked back to the room, Oscar putting his helmet back on and following. The two entered, Oscar shuddering when he saw the flesh again. It took everything he had to not focus on the details, just watching as Bradley jumped, his jetpack providing a bit of extra thrust to get him to the top of the mountain. Then he grabbed the tree sprout, his hands sparking with Psycha as he pulled. The tree and its roots were ripped from the mountain, shredding everything it had been rooted to and dripping with blood as Bradley quickly came back down. They left the room, Oscar leaving behind charges. Bradley just dragged the tree behind him, his hands still flashing with mental clashes. "We should move quickly, sir. This thing is fucking mean, even if it's not powerful. Right? Let's go." The two started running, the rest of Team 1 waiting for them. Leaving behind the central chamber, they ran through the temple toward their exit, quickly finding their way back to the other teams. They fell in behind the wagons of children, blazing through the tunnels, which were much wider than before after being expanded by an Earth warlock. It took a fraction of the time to get back to the surface where they found the other teams. Their exit was amidst a plaza, Nephilim all around despite it being the dead of night. Still, nobody noticed the gathering teams, illusory formations surrounding their gathering. Then, the helicopters descended. 5 of them lowered and surrounded the teams, more troops jumping out and slaughtering any nearby Nephilim that got too close. Oscar watched as the children were loaded into the large transport helicopters. Up above, his HUD pinged and showed the gunships several thousand feet in the skies, cannons trained on their area. Oscar's communicator suddenly pinged, the cinder coming from that gunship. Incoming enemy forces spotted. Engaging. The gunship's barrels flashed, shells slamming into another block of the city with a massive explosion that shook the entire area awake. Oscar started to feel the approach of some more powerful enemies, a helicopter zooming over their heads and coming to an aggressive stop, weapons trained on one particular street. He saw some armored royals and Nephilim, as well as corrupted, turn the corner of a building and charge straight toward them. The helicopter above engaged the instant they did so. Turrets went to rapid fire, lighting up the enemy with snapping explosions. Oscar shouted, "Move, now. We have 1 minute." The other teams were already hastening, wagons being lifted and emptied. They had to be careful with these fragile children, but time constraints meant they were a bit more aggressive with transferring them. Soon, Oscar jumped into one of the transports. He gave the signal after all hatches had been closed. "Everyone's loaded. Get us out of here." The helicopters all ascended with that command. Oscar pressed into his seat with how hard the helicopters peeled away. Soon they were in the sky, more comms coming from the gunships. Targets neutralized. Maintaining observation. No more shells were sent as all of them rose to the skies and beyond the reach of any more potential high-authority enemies. Oscar sighed. The ride was silent afterward, all of them simply waiting as they flew to their destination. It wasn't long before they descended. The surroundings looked like they were in the middle of nowhere, but when the helicopters flew past a barrier, it revealed an entire operational base. They lowered to the helipads, everyone jumping out as soon as they touched ground. Oscar made way, allowing the incoming troops to help unload. The children were ferried onto transports before getting taken away to the medical wards. Oscar just stood and watched. Once all the children were gone, he turned to his team, who were standing nearby. "Everyone needs to see a healer before we retire tonight. I'll be checking logs. Bradley, you're with me. The rest of you are dismissed." Oscar waved, Bradley following behind, still dragging that small death shrine. They made their way to the medical wards where Oscar had been instructed to head, Bradley seeming a bit nervous as he got the same message. Oscar noticed and asked, "What's wrong? I can carry that thing if you need me to." "No, it's not that. Have you ever met the commander before, sir?" "No, I haven't." Oscar shook his head, taking off his helmet. This base was entirely Sector 4, so they weren't required to hide their face like at the Glass Desert. Bradley shifted a bit, rereading the message, which told them both where they needed to go as well as the fact that the commander was there. "Well, at least to us, he's a bit difficult to stand in front of." "To us as in Sector 4? "Well, that and summoners especially. There's a reason he's known as the most powerful summoner. I've looked up to him ever since I joined Iron Legion. Things became different when I got offered to join Sector 4 though. Every summoner who wants to join Covert Ops has to meet him personally. Seeing him in Iron Legion had been one thing, but when I met him for my interview, hell, I just about left a different person." "How so?" Oscar raised his brow confusedly. He knew John Cooper was a legendary existence within Iron Legion. In his eye, though, General Polly was doubly more terrifying. That woman was absolutely ruthless with them. She was the orchestrator of every catastrophe they carried out, the mind behind their black operations. Bradley took another deep breath. "Well, just don't bullshit him. Don't hide anything, even in your mind. The man is damn near fucking clairvoyant, can detect your thoughts before you even know you have them. I know people think that General Polly is the terrible mind behind our operations, but I can assure you, that man is the sole reason for what we do." "Is that right?" Oscar went quiet, Bradley still looking uncomfortable. He just ignored it, thoughts stirring in his head. Eventually, they found themselves near the medical wards, entering a building to the side. It was there that they found the person they needed to meet. John Cooper, in the flesh. Beside him was his wife, Amara Cooper. Oscar had seen her a few times before while the line was still active. She always baffled him, containing such power within her incredible beauty. Though, he wondered what possessed her to always wear that oversized hat. He shook those thoughts out of his mind before looking back at the man in charge. Beside him was the commanding officer of this base, General Burris. Bradley gave the sharpest salute Oscar had ever seen from him once they were in front of John Cooper. He followed soon after, Oscar taking the lead. Dagger 11 and 13 reporting as requested, sir. Evening, gentlemen. He turned to them with a neutral face, his eyes quickly falling on the tree that Bradley continued to hold. He put out his hand. Allow me to take that from you, Chief Bradley. Yes, sir. Bradley pulled it over, allowing John Cooper to grasp it. Unlike Bradley, though, his hand didn't spark with psychic conflict. Instead, it was the tree that went docile. John Cooper simply held it and stared at it, Oscar evaluating the man all the while. He was definitely large. Oscar had never seen such a tall summoner before. He was built like a wall, too, a body perfect for a knight. Yet not only was he just a summoner, he was Authority 8, 2 authorities underneath himself. He wondered why Bradley, who was Authority 9, was so intimidated by the man. He couldn't feel anything from John Cooper, the most powerful summoner to ever live. Eventually, the man frowned. It was his wife that noticed first. She asked with a wonderful voice that soothed Oscar's soul just by hearing it. What's wrong? They're getting smarter. The fact that they're beginning to see through our illusion tech is bad enough. We can roll out the next generation, but that'll only hold them for so much longer. Oscar inwardly nodded. Previous missions had been completed without a single soul noticing their existence, even when a helicopter was right next to them. But recently, that had changed. The fact that they had to fight off an entire unit of guards at all meant that their tech was losing its edge. Something was seeing through them. Amara asked again, what would be able to crack adaptive camouflage? I don't know. Either something conceptual or a new generation of scouts. We're going to have to adjust protocol and move faster. He went silent before looking between Oscar and Bradley, the latter still stiff as a nail. Thank you, gentlemen. Apologies for asking you to grab this for me given what it was rooted in, but this could be a valuable lead. If you have nothing else for me, you two may go. Sir. Bradley saluted and was about to turn, freezing when he noticed Oscar not moving. Oscar decided to do away with any hesitations he had. What he had just seen did a good job of lowering his reservations and nerves, even in front of John Cooper. Commander, I have a question. I probably have an answer to it. John Cooper looked up at him, the entire room dead silent. Even the nearby doctors were moving carefully, as if a misplaced sound would spell their death. Oscar carefully chose his words. I have a question about the raids, sir. I've never been able to see the data, but after seeing the city, I've realized that as we destroyed more towns and villages of Nephilim, they've flocked to the cities, which have resulted in their spread increasing by incredible rates. They've completely taken over several major cities, millions of Nephilim roaming those streets and spreading to other population centers. I understand that as Iron Legion's commander, nothing happens without your approval. I just don't understand why this was how it had to go. It seems our efforts have only made things worse. What's going on in the next building over is just a small glimpse of what we've caused. I can't fathom how many children have been killed ever since the cities started getting corrupted. So please, tell me why it had to happen like this. Please tell me we weren't the ones that caused this. You doubt whether or not we caused this. Oscar frowned, seeing John Cooper's twisted face, as if he were looking at an idiot that just vomited on his shoe. He sighed in clear resignation. Fine. No, we didn't cause this. We aren't the ones out there torturing, killing, and drinking the blood of children. The enemy is doing that, and what's happening with the cities now was an inevitability. It was only a matter of when, not if. So you accelerated what was going to happen, brought it forward. I'm controlling the pace of my war, and make no mistake, this is my war. There are 5 fronts in my war, and I'm making sure that I'm the one leading the tempo in all of them. I need to coordinate every note, every pitch, every bar, key, and time, or what can be equated to those things. I've already shifted the symphony onto my tracks, and anything less would mean the deaths of. He suddenly stopped when his wife placed her hand on his shoulder, catching himself and clearing his throat. Oscar just stood there, hands trembling as his mind flashed with thousands of images. Until John Cooper slapped his shoulder, all of them disappearing from his psyche. Apologies. My answer is timing. Now, I've got to break this death shrine open, so I'll see you gentlemen later. He and his wife quickly walked away with the general, Bradley remaining rooted until they were out of sight. Then, he smacked Oscar. What would possibly possess you to do that? I saw things. Oscar muttered, Bradley tilting his head. Saw things? What things? I don't know if I should tell you. He might kill me if I did. You know what? I believe it. Let's get the hell out of here. I'm done with today. Bradley pushed Oscar along, the two leaving like they were about to be caught stealing something. Chapter 318, The Legion Gazette. The Legion Gazette. May 28, 629. Iron Legion has crossed the pass. After tremendous efforts and coordination from warlocks and summoners throughout 1st Brigade, Hare's Pass north of the fallen stronghold Charlie has been bridged. With new access to the north, Iron Legion promises swift traversal to key Scourge targets. No longer is humanity on the defensive. For the first time in centuries, the fight is being taken to the enemy. June 19, 629. Yet another nexus eradicated. After a major siege conducted by 3rd and 8th Brigade, yet another nexus of Scourge hives and royal concentrations has fallen. Images provided by Iron Legion agents detail the colossal structure and scenes of its destruction, as well as select photos of the undefeatable army as they trampled across monstrous scum to burn the nexus to the ground. With this fallen nexus, Iron Legion is one step closer to taking the entire western coast of the continent. June 24, 629. Escalations in Fairway City. Nephilim holding remaining humans hostage. As Fairway City saw the rise of Nephilim populations, most humans ended up migrating out of the rapidly corrupting city. However, as Nephilim took control of the city hall and drove out human guards, escalations with local human magi resulted in all-out battles. Months later, and all magi have either been corrupted or killed, but now the ordinary human population is powerless to escape. Reports from anonymous sources state that what few humans remain have been held hostage by the city, now entirely controlled and populated by Nephilim. Fairway City is only one in a long chain of cities falling to Nephilim control, with even more on the downer. Analysts say that the most dense population centers are prime targets, and those wishing to remain out of Nephilim control should prepare themselves. As demonstrated in Fairway City, escape may not be an option. July 1st, 629. The last western nexus reduced to rubble. With Iron Legion's advance northward, the furthest nexus from the reach of the front lines has finally been brought down. Insider sources say the Legion has now shifted its focus to the east. With the war still moving at maximum intensity, Iron Legion is on track to conquer the entire northern region beyond the River of Desolation. Analysts say that the lack of extreme terrain and evidence of Iron Legion's efficiency could mean that it may only take months for the indomitable brigades to reach the opposite coast, while some say anything less than multiple years is unrealistic. While Iron Legion correspondents have been silent on estimates for the sake of security, their attitude and confidence is cause for optimism. July 15, 629. Calls to resistance sweep city of Coden. A rallying cry heard for hundreds of miles. The city of Coden, ruled by Count Coden, has called upon magi of all walks to help local leaders mount a formal resistance against the influx of Nephilim. Having suffered constant aggression from Nephilim populations who migrated from distant villages, official decrees to expel them were passed and enforced with the city guard. The city was later met with attacks from external Nephilim groups that sought to strong-arm them into reopening the gates, but were rebuffed with the help of magi who resided in the city. Now, Count Coden seeks to liberate surrounding villages and towns, enforcing the decree across his territory. An example for cities across the whole of the kingdom, the city of Coden fights with both resources and weapons. An interview with Count Coden has revealed that he has no knowledge of where generous donations of previously unseen weapons came from, but has nonetheless put them to good use in order to mount a defensive against any aggressive groups of Nephilim. Continuing to maintain secure connections with surrounding towns for resources, Count Coden calls on other city lords to follow in his footsteps. The Legion Gazette continues to operate their branch within the city to bring you closely monitored updates week after week. August 22nd, 629. Central Continental Nexus destroyed. After months of fighting and systematic siege, a major nexus in the central region of the Northern Scourge territories has been destroyed. On a map, this would mean that Iron Legion has swept through half of the Scourge's territory, and while the battle is far from over, this monumental success by itself is enough for the history books. Iron Legion continues its campaign with the same vigor that it started with. No signs of slowing down based on reports from correspondents. While casualties have in fact been sustained, they remain minimal and few deaths have occurred. August 30th, 629. Marquis assassinated. King Alfin calls for investigation. The third Marquis to be assassinated this year has sparked outrage among high noble circles, whose populations have shrunk in recent years due to a long series of murders and assassinations that have gone entirely unsolved. No longer able to sit still, King Alfin has launched a formal investigation with the help of the royal family and allied Grand Dukedoms to find the culprit. Insider sources say the brunt of their scrutiny seems to be aimed at human-dominated groups that have resisted the influx of Nephilim, especially including Son Industries and their connections with Iron Legion. Although they have yet to give specific statements, it's impossible to mistake the large groups of Royal Guard outside of Son Industry establishments, especially around the Magic Spire. September 3rd, 629. A Scourge sovereign has been repelled. With the advance of Iron Legion into territory that has been dominated by the Scourge for centuries, encountering powerful enemies has always been a worry. And yet, in a stunning turn of events, with confirmation provided by Iron Legion sources, another Scourge sovereign has been encountered and rebuffed with help from Chief Ironheart of the Wedded City. This makes two encountered Scourge sovereigns since the start of Iron Legion's campaign, the first being killed as they reclaimed the fallen Treehouse stronghold. With this record, some have begun calling to make the Raven family that Chief Ironheart belongs to into a proper Grand Dukedom, status that would give them sway over the highest kingdom politics and earn them a seat next to the king. However, correspondence from the royal family has returned only sharp refusals to acknowledge the new authority 12 Knight, claiming that Iron Legion's proclaimed feats are without integrity and severely exaggerated, all despite photos and video being provided as evidence. September 7th, 629. Ordinary humans, now becoming magi. The Holy See has recently announced a stunning new achievement. While previously only rumors, the Church's new invocation technology, released for public knowledge but still strictly controlled, has finally entered mass-scale adoption. Invocations, an enchantment-like series of magical augmentations for both existing magi and normal humans, have the ability to grant powers to any that receive them. While the type of power depends on what invocation is inscribed on a person's body, they are nearly fully customizable, only limited in adoption and capability by the resources needed to grant them. For now, only select groups have outwardly displayed their new invocations. The most notable is the Blind Sisterhood, operated by Sovereign Warlock Hallowlight of the Holy See. Other groups come from a variety of peerages, and while no unaffiliated organizations have been granted the privilege of invocation magic, the fact remains that it will continue to spread and grant the ordinary population of the world a new path of advancement and power just like magi. Analysts are already making theories about the revolutionary effects this will have on the world as we know it. On the other hand, we can also expect to see severe competition when the magic leaks and reaches the hands of other parties around both the church and kingdom. September 12th, 629. Catastrophic battle on the horizon. Recent messages from Iron Legion officials say that another major battle is soon to arrive. As the indomitable army approaches the final phases of their campaign across Scourge territory, raising everything in their path, higher concentrations of monsters are gathering to mount a proper defensive. Although impossible to resist, Iron Legion will be encountering one of its largest open-field battles to date. Correspondents have assured that they will continue to update with any major news. I flicked through the last article, nodding at the clickbaity titles and carefully crafted wording. Our newspaper companies have been working overtime recently in all kinds of cities across the kingdom. Not just them either. Agents responsible for spreading the words and rumors by word of mouth were doing their jobs swimmingly. Half of my plan hinged on their success. As much as I didn't care to propagandize or politic, Informing people of what was happening was an important piece of my puzzle. Nobody was happy with the current kingdom. Nephilim were overrunning the cities and were not just actively corrupting them, but killing them and driving them out. Population numbers were going down, and people were beginning to feel it and get scared. Some people were already up in arms. What I was doing was making sure that nobody would be able to escape the knowledge of what was happening. It was happening fast, and that speed was precisely what I was betting on. After all, I was the one who accelerated the explosive spread of the Nephilim. The newspaper disappeared from my hands with a thought. Word about our upcoming battle didn't need to be hidden. I had mentioned it to our public liaisons on a whim, but at this point there was nothing the Scourge could do that could catch us off guard anyway. I didn't care if they knew about whether or not they'd be getting in a large battle soon. There was nothing they could do to prepare, and besides, it wasn't like they didn't actually know. I had my generals move as if the Scourge knew their every thought, and so far it had worked. Surprises were a thing of the past. There was no fog of war here for either side, and neither of us were acting like it. I sat back for a few more minutes, listening to the sounds of rolling metal mixed with a cacophony of violins, lutes, flutes, drums, and oddly enough, tubas. I gave my mind time to zone out, thinking about nothing and everything. I stayed like that until I felt rainfall on my skin. I opened my eyes, seeing the metal wall of the tank in front of me, not a drop of water on my clothes. But it was raining, and after putting on my exosuit, I unlatched the exit hatch above me, pulling myself through. I gazed upon the location we were in, the tank rolling to a stop, others surrounding it in practiced formations. It was nothing but endless biomat all around us. The color red was damn near the only color we ever saw for months now. It covered sand, dirt, and sometimes even snow and ice. It was simply everywhere, and these regions of biomat were thickened with age. Rocky dirt was underneath this area of biomat, exposed only when teams started to tear up those veined roots to clear the campsite. My view trailed to the distance, though, in several locations only visible due to the towering beacons of fire that indicated them. Spore nests had become one of our primary targets, and in these regions, they dotted the landscapes every several miles. Due to their abundance and how entrenched they could be, they started getting slightly expensive to clear out. We couldn't send bunker buster missiles at every single one we came across just to uproot it. So we did the next best thing. We lit them aflame. The spewers were rigged with formations and a few fire crystals, then ignited and set to self-sustain. Just like that, the spore nests burned through nutrients and biomatter, sending endless amounts of spores into a fiery column. It wasted Scourge resources while eventually killing the problem. Spore nests by themselves weren't actually a major issue. They were responsible for environmental catastrophes, sure, but they weren't like a nexus, a direct source of harm to my troops. Therefore, we didn't need to expend so much to ensure their demise. Igniting them was the best choice. That made for the spectacular view before me. Massive torches of flame, some closer than others in the distance. They blazed for hundreds of feet before cooling into heated black smoke. Although, perhaps I should have guessed what that would lead to. After many weeks of those nests burning without end, so much smoke had flooded the local atmosphere that it had started to cool and condense. The result was what I had felt inside the tank just now. Except, it wasn't rain on my skin. Instead, I felt thick drops of tarry black fluid spatter on my suit. At first it was sparse, but when it picked up, it started to coat everything. My exosuit and the tanks around me were swiftly painted black, the soldiers all raising barriers and protections against the toxic downpour. Before long, though, some warlocks got the shields up and running, creating a massive dome around the campsite that stopped the rain. I saw the rain create a thick film over the shield, sliding off, but not fast enough to actually maintain sightlines beyond. In minutes we were covered by a black dome, but nobody cared much. Although it was the first time I was experiencing it, it wasn't the first for these men. I wasn't always on the front lines recently. Unfortunately, I occasionally missed the interesting stuff like toxic tar rain. Not this time, though. I shook my hand, none of the liquid coming off as it cooled and solidified around my suit. Soldiers had quickly gone from setting up camp to deploying cleaning facilities, getting the rain out of armor and away from where they were setting up tents. My, how attractive. Amara sauntered over with a smile, not a single blemishing drop anywhere on her clothes. Speaking of her clothes, I quickly noticed some recent modifications she had made to them. Gone were her old warlock robes she used to wear. Her garb had undergone several refinements over time as she became adept at enchanting, and now it was both simpler and more powerful. She wore a thick overcoat that matched the black fabric of her witch hat. Around her torso was a complex arrangement of metal plating and protections, every separate piece enchanted and connected to each other in an array. They had several functions, not the least of which was using a new set of spatial magic for defense instead of offense. At her waist, the overcoat split to reveal her pants underneath, form-fitting yet a bit loose for movement and comfort. Then there were her combat boots, which meshed with the pants, covered in more metal plates with a variety of functions for enhanced mobility. Finally, her hands poked out from her sleeves, covered in armored gloves primarily there for protection instead of magic casting. She was a living foci, so there was little need for another unless it was far more powerful than she was, which was difficult to find and impossible to make at the moment. So therefore, her gloves were enchanted with heavy protection arrays that helped make sure she wouldn't lose her fingers in close combat engagements, whether by her own spells or by her enemy. I don't have projectable shields, unfortunately. Nothing so convenient. Right? All you have is everything else. Maybe after this advancement. I'm quite looking forward to what becomes available. So far it was exosuits and a newer generation of firearms. But if my next authority jumps another generation, I have a hard time imagining what would be in store. Well, I can certainly feel you getting closer. I can tell you've been cultivating more. Think the advancement will be soon. I nodded to her, the song shifting and making me more comfortable with sending my exosuit away. I had comprehended my advancement formation some time ago. Now my time had been spent ceaselessly cultivating my power. I had been using a set of linked authority 10 white crystals that had been sourced from 2 behemoths, and so far things had gone well. My power was beginning to reach that tipping point, but at the same time, my mind was filled with what would come after. Maxwell had said a long time ago that his call stopped at authority 10. It was debatable on whether or not it actually could get me there, primarily due to whether it accommodated breaching the Great Barrier. The man was a genius, but not even he had broken through. That meant he didn't have the experience to build those things into his call. The advancement formation to authority 9 was still solid. I could see no ways to improve it or change it that wouldn't simply make it worse. And since it had felt correct while cultivating, that meant nature itself agreed with it. But I had seen none of the next advancement formation. It was safe to say that Maxwell and I would be holding plenty of discussions if I couldn't figure things out myself. Besides that, though, Authority 9 was swift on approach, and I was planning to advance within the next month. The only reason I was here instead of back at my estate cultivating was because of the upcoming battle. Not only would there be a sovereign waiting for us, but we were about to lay siege to a previously unencountered scourge structure. It was a step up from a nexus. From a distance, it looked like a trio of nexuses in one. A massive complex that seemed to me like the perfect place to store an intelligence capable of managing the entire war effort in the northern regions of the continent. I was expecting that intelligence I had fought to be there, which meant there were more than likely 2 sovereigns waiting instead of just the one we repelled. Since Ironheart wasn't in the position to handle more than one, I had already called Anderson and got his agreement to kill the other. The man was more than happy to help. It wasn't every day the opportunity to fight sovereigns popped up. Amara walked up to me, leaning into me with my arm habitually wrapping around her shoulders. We looked off toward the rest of the camp, everyone moving around, preparing food for the most part. My husband is almost at authority 9. I might be advancing again soon after, though. Honestly, I never thought I'd actually beat you to authority 10. You underestimate yourself, my beautiful bride. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. So how about we retire early? Sounds like a wonderful idea. We exchanged a kiss before heading to our group, all of them preparing food. We sat down by Fiden and Blackblood and ate our food quickly before heading to an open area. After throwing down an unassuming, though slightly larger tent, we climbed in and activated the myriad of enchantments across the fabrics and armors. And we had our fun before we went to sleep, making sure we were fully prepared for our fight the next day. Chapter 319, Extra Spicy. September 18th, 629. It's been getting worse. Amara muttered from beside me as we rolled. I nodded and continued staring off into the distance, my exosuit over my body, Totenstall in my lap. Tar rain had continued to fall ever since it started some days ago, giving us little respite. The entire ground was covered in the stuff, and for once, We were actually thankful for the biomat. It seemed to recycle the sludgy byproduct of burnt spore nests, growing even further. I only cared that it provided proper grip for our vehicles. For every other purpose, though, it was a negative. Everything that the Scourge touched was poisoned by miasmic magicka. The same toxic magic that was present in black crystals harvested from monster corpses was present in everything else, including those spore nests. Unfortunately, it didn't disappear after being burned. Quite the opposite, we spread it almost as well as the spore nests did normally by sending it into the atmosphere. The air was dangerous to breath now, and at this point, not even the enchanted armors of my troops could completely block out the poisonous mana. We could keep up shields, but as soon as engagement started, they had to be redirected. Not all the rain could be kept out every second of the day, so inevitably, vehicles and troops were coated in the tar. Some of those with weaker constitutions had already gotten sick, even though they always wore their armor. According to Amara, the mere presence of the miasma devastated the immune system by acting like a parasite. And although there weren't any viruses or bacteria present in the tar, the body still reacted as if there were. Weakness, vomiting, sometimes blistering, and even infections. The body was plagued, and besides expelling the poisonous magic, there was little the healers could do. Amara was one of the few capable of completely healing the sick. She told me that not only was her special magic particularly suited to it, but apparently, her treatments often involved the priests sent from the church. Blessings and purifications worked wonders, even though I struggled to see it. Where she saw parasitic disease and demonic afflictions, I heard a disharmonious song and cries of resistance. Still, their treatments brought those annoying drums and electronic squeals back into tempo and tune, so I had no complaints. Thankfully, most of the sick and wounded had been sent out, because we'd need all hands on deck for what was coming. Artillery had already been deployed at our rear, and while they had been shelling the oversized nexus for a day now, effects were minimal with the Sovereign stationed there. We needed Ironheart to begin his attack to deliver any meaningful damage and occupy the Sovereign while we sent everything we had their way. The nexus needed to be destroyed, and all its occupants needed to be killed. That meant a direct engagement was inevitable, even though I knew what we'd be facing. I sat on top of the command tank, the ride smooth as we made our approach. That oversized nexus stood tall in the distance, and even from miles away I could feel the nasty presence of those sovereigns, especially that intelligence. From here I could see it as if it had always been there. A dense network of psychic power that flowed from the nexus in bright branches that tickled my auric senses. They resonated with the atmosphere above and the biomat below. I looked down, and that's when I finally managed to sense it. I could feel that intelligence staring at me from the biomat roots underneath the tanks. Could hear it stare and taste its malicious intent. With a smile, I realized another truth of the biomat. It was there as a sensory organ on top of every other function. It was a well-kept secret that not even I had seen through. And yet it didn't matter, because in my rightful paranoia, I had moved my troops as if their every movement and intention were fully known by the enemy. Turns out it hadn't taken a sovereign to read and predict the movement of my army by the song of the universe. It had merely been the nerves covering every square mile of terrain within Scourge territory. But as faint as they were, even these senses had limits. That must have been what each nexus was for. More than a hub for strategic musterings and nesting, each nexus had its own intelligent organ to manage the biomat sensory network. I had no doubt in my mind that was precisely why they were there. The one I had spoken to was proof enough that I was correct. A single entity couldn't handle being connected to a nervous system spanning the northern region of the entire continent. That wasn't mentioning the falloff for the connection. Those routes couldn't accommodate enough power to send and receive signals from so far. I chuckled, and the tanks eventually came to a stop. Troops jumped out of nearby vehicles and started setting up mobile defensive structures between each super heavy tank. I stood from my spot and stepped around the flickers that had been lying about the armor, jumping off and walking out in front of the formation. We had nearly every brigade in attendance. Artillery was still shelling the nexus. I could see those shells flying through the air just before they slammed into the shields above the structures. Bombers hadn't bothered wasting the ordnance, but there were still hundreds of them in the skies flying in formations, waiting. The nexus was around 5 miles from us. its principal structure stretching at least 2,000 feet into the sky. From its peak stretched the streams of psychic connections, some of them reaching behind us. I had no illusions that we had cleared everything out, but I still didn't enjoy seeing so many connections still functional. "Commander, we're ready." General Gaffney approached me, as well as Marshal Boulant. Ironheart also appeared. There was little that hiding him would do. I could already feel the Scourge Sovereign's attention, and I knew the two were just itching to begin the fight. "So, do we just start shooting?" Ironheart asked as Amara took her place by my side. I unfortunately couldn't smoke a cigar with my helmet on, so I had to opt for a proper response. "No. They want to talk." What discussion could possibly be held with them? The one where they make their threats. I don't know what they think it'll do, but I have my guesses and I plan to hear what they have to say, even if for no reason than to see if I can glean any intel. Let's wait a second. See how they plan to approach this fight. My eyes remained on the nexus in the distance. Surrounded by a massive wall, it was impossible to see within it from my point of view. It was a good thing several recon planes were in the air, giving me other aerial views. Soon I didn't need it though. The main gate on the wall opened up and out flooded the Scourge. However, this time we weren't faced with mere monsters. Sure, there were tens of thousands of those, but all of them had riders on them. Massive grisly beasts propped up armored riders, both royals and corrupted alike. There were even some king bloods. I could feel the auras of unholy light and anarchy. Those king bloods were a head above the rest, an obvious hierarchy between them and the other royals, even in a military formation. Indeed, the army we would be facing would not merely be mindless monsters that had nothing more than numbers. For the first time in my life, I saw royals amass how they were supposed to. Skilled warriors, and in great numbers. The Scourge always had enough to do so. I had even heard stories from Aki about the kinds of armies they faced in the last days of the Pillars of Creation. There were many millions of royals, just as there were millions of corrupted. It was only now that they deigned to form up and face me properly. Only after I swept through half of their territory did they finally muster the effort to create this army. They got arranged in their own formation outside the nexus, and just as I thought, moved no further from there. I could hear General Gaffney shouting at our channels to hold fire. We had never given our enemy a second to stand before us without firing upon them. This was a first, and it took vast self-control from our troops. There was a standoff for several minutes, both sides merely watching the other. Then, I felt a wave of psychic power shoot toward my army. I released my own, everything I could muster in a fraction of a second to create a massive barrier. It manifested physically when it collided with the enemies, lightening up with my dense arrays of encrypted programmed magic, propagating in repeating fractal patterns across our entire formation. Despite having far lesser power, my programmed magic remained undefeated. Thus, only I heard the message that was sent as the attack and defense nullified each other. "Send the one from Earth." I smirked, a slight tinge of anticipation filling me. Then I looked at Amara. "I'm gonna need you to hang back." "The fuck I will. Give me a damn good reason to let you meet an enemy alone. They're from Earth, and I'm going to have a nice conversation with them." Amara went quiet, surprised, but not convinced. "They'll try and kill you. I'm betting on it. Even underneath that armor, you're still fragile. Keeps me sharp." She scowled, glancing at the army in the distance. From them came a single figure, a tall humanoid on what closely resembled a warhorse. They trotted out, heading to the halfway point. Seeing that it really was just one of them, Amara looked back at me. "You better keep that escape trinket on a fine fucking trigger, John. Don't get hurt before this battle even starts." "That's a promise." I held out my pinky finger, letting Amara wrap her own around it. Then I brought out a Viper craft from my spatial pocket, boarding the hoverbike and heading to the halfway point. My vehicle was only slightly faster than that warhorse, and so we both hit the area around the same time. We slowed to a stop 100 or so yards away from each other. He jumped off his horse, and I sent the Viper craft away. We walked the rest of the distance, stopping 10 yards away from each other. I remained in my exosuit with Totenstall resting in my grip, the tar reins still falling atop me, the other man protected by a barrier. I watched him, and he stared at me, both of us making our evaluations. The man before me was definitely from Earth. I could see it in the way he carried himself and the way he looked at me with a tinge of familiarity. He was dressed in silk black robes, taller than I was even in my exosuit, beyond 8 feet. His face looked wholly human, but perfect in such a way that made him seem more so. There was no hint of mutation or ugliness, his skin unblemished, his symmetry giving him a nearly feminine handsomeness. He had taken great care of his vanity, that was for certain. Around his multiple layers of lavish robes were colored ties. On his waist was a skinny blade with a red tassel, his hands cupped together under his wide sleeves. The garb looked Asian, but this man definitely wasn't. My indication was on his head. Uncovered by his long, flowing black hair was a symbol on his forehead, carved in his skin as if by a hot iron, still slightly glowing red. I recognized it, a distant memory surfacing from a darker time of study. The seal of Saturn. Slowly he smiled at me, glancing over my shoulder at my army, speaking in perfect English. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, John Cooper. Ever since I saw images of your guns, I knew this day would come. I knew other Versals, as they call us, were here, even knew of a few. But after they were killed, I thought I was just one of a few within the scourge. Certainly, I didn't expect an American to suddenly be sent here. We tend to get shit done, unlike others. The angels probably knew that. Ah yes, there's that familiar naive arrogance. I almost missed it. Seeing it used to be a source of joy for me, knowing that you all were so hilariously ignorant to the truth of the world. Yes, used to be. Until you realized that it didn't matter how deep in the darkness you worked or how much of the truth you hid. We still resisted, and to great effect. And yet never enough to truly stop us. You all would fall inevitably. On the lands below, yes, we would. But we both know you will never truly succeed. And right now, that's what gives me a little joy. For as much as you've tormented me over the past half year, I still know a basic truth is this. And against you, it seems particularly effective. I saw his derisive smile grow in response, glancing once more at the seal on his forehead. I motioned my chin at it. From the Key of Solomon, right? I guess those things really do work better here. To far greater effect than on Earth. Perhaps it was a matter of course. Communing with those gods in the outer layers was always difficult, and so those on Earth studied the mysticism far more. The people here are so disgustingly inept by comparison. If the avenues on Earth were mere pinholes, then on this world, they're wide open doors. It makes me a master among blithering idiots. On a similar note, my God told me that you had been spoken to by another. What did you think? Quite the uncomfortable experience, one I won't be repeating. How unfortunate. But you must know too, unless you've been willfully ignoring it. It's not like the only beings you can commune with are spirits and demons. You can invoke hierarchical angels, too. The knowledge and power available to you is vast, hidden merely behind communication. You of all people should know this, given who your teacher is. My eyes narrowed, and it was as if he could see the reaction through my helmet, his smile widening. Has he not told you? The only paladin and sovereign to be branded a heretic, and he hasn't told his pupil about what he did? Those evocations could be considered his most valuable work. I was hoping he had passed them on to you. We might actually have something interesting to talk about if he did. Well, it's clear I've got some questions to ask then. Indeed you do. But before you leave here, I have warnings to give. I had to argue with a sovereign to get this talk with you, but I'm still required to deliver their words. His smile dropped into a frown, as if displeased to be saying any words other than his own. You cannot fathom the depths of our reach. Like on Earth, the truth of this world is beyond you. You may think you've glimpsed some of it after creating your army and extending your network of intelligence, but you've only tossed yourself into ocean-deep waters, still yet to see through the darkness of the deep. You don't even realize who rules this world, otherwise you'd see how futile your struggle is. Today's battle is inevitable, but when you leave here today, assuming you manage to, your warning is thus. Stop while you can, and you'll be spared torment that what you've already experienced can't compare to. Remove your gaze from places they don't belong. Remove your ears from walls you shouldn't know exist. Speak nothing of what you can't know. Take your delicious wife and live the rest of your days on this world away from its affairs, and you too will be granted your slice of peace for as long as humanity manages to survive. Otherwise, we will feed her to you and drown you in her blood. Every person you've come to befriend will be flayed, and we will wear their faces as they scream for mercy, kept alive by magic for no other purpose than unending agony, until they mutate into something worse than even a monster. I stared at him blandly, his frowning face blooming back into a psychotic smile, a chuckle escaping. Being honest, you should do us both a favor and continue resisting like you have. It'll give me an excuse to taste that wife of yours. I know your fancy magical planes and tanks give you confidence. You should lean into that. I'm curious, what's your specialty? What role do you hold in the grand scheme of Scourge things? He went back to frowning at me, eyes narrowing. What kind of stupid question is that? I just wanted to know how much I'm going to cripple the Scourge by killing you. You're far less intelligent than I thought you were if you really believe you could possibly do that. Which means now, I'm disinterested in further talk. He said that with a flash of his hand. His blade was removed from its sheath faster than the eye could track. Then I watched as it smoothly glided through my helmet at the neck, with such speed and precision that blood didn't even spray. The sword came out the other side, my head separated from my body. Then, my finger depressed my trigger. The weapon at my shoulder cracked with power. The XSR-3 was an extreme ballistic pressure sniper rifle built for long-range precision shooting with a .80 caliber and a 5-foot-long barrel. Using liquid explosive compounds and caseless ammunition instead of gunpowder and cartridges, the rifle could pack far more of a punch while accommodating a higher projectile mass. For good measure, I brought out an APFSDS round with all the bells and whistles of futuristic ballistics, packing it with about as much psycho as possible, as well as illusions, enchantment disruptors, and extra spicy neural scorchers. If not for my programmed magic concealing it, the radiating psycho would be a beacon for the entire battlefield to see. I saw the round make impact a fraction of a second after firing, covering 1.74 miles in 0.351 seconds, give or take a few thousandths of a second. The sabot made contact with my target at the side of his head, depleted uranium providing armor-penetrating power backed by speeds in excess of 30,000 feet per second. His forehead flashed, a barrier appearing around his skull right as the penetrator started working. And then with barely concealed exasperation, I watched the sabot get redirected, his head jerking with the momentum. I still watched half his face get blown off, including a large chunk of his skull and brain with it. There was so much power behind that round that if it exerted any of its kinetic energy, there would be incredible consequences. It seemed a tiny portion of it slipped through those automatic defenses. Only half his head was vaporized, though. The other half remained, and soon after the impact, his body vanished with a snap of spatial magic, avoiding my follow-up shot. I sighed behind my rifle. He had prepared for me to aim for the head and concentrated all of his defenses there, but anything less than that would be non-lethal. Bodies as strong as theirs wouldn't die even with their entire torso gone. I was sure they had plenty of life-saving measures far more advanced and capable than our healing magic. A clean headshot was my only chance to kill him in one go. Seems like with all my power, I couldn't quite get it. He was definitely at least Authority 10. With the talent of a Versal, there was no way I could reach across that power scale at Authority 8. If I had advanced, based on the results, it would have worked. Unfortunately, I wasn't quite fast enough. How unfortunate. Well, I knew he'd be having fun with those neural scorchers, wherever he is. By this point, they were worse than what Blackblood had experienced so long ago, being grazed by my seer knife. I let out a long breath while standing up, pinging General Gaffney. Then, the line of tanks unleashed fire, shells slamming into the formation of royals and blowing apart their defenses. Chapter 320, Come Dance With Me. September 18th, 629. Amara bit her nails as she watched John meet with that Versal. She had a few views, more than a few cameras trained on his position. She could feel the tension among the army around her. The commander of Iron Legion was meeting face to face with the enemy by himself. Although he was a mythical existence among them, everyone knew he was still a summoner. Underneath that esoteric armor, he was still a weak man of flesh. Amara knew he could handle himself, that he wouldn't ever put himself in the position to get hurt, let alone get killed. Still, he could be unpredictably reckless on occasion, especially now, with his mental state being where it was. Thankfully, she had managed to create a teleportation trinket. It would destroy itself upon use, but it was capable of teleporting the user miles away and, most importantly, instantly. She saw John and that Versal stand apart from each other. She saw the Versal's smile, that almost abnormally perfect face, and his disgusting excitement. She could feel his attention fall on her for some moments, feeling like eyes were sliding over her body and making her shiver. She lashed back with an application of aura, glancing at John, seeing no reaction. She couldn't hear them as they started talking. She couldn't read the Versal's lips either. They were speaking their language from Earth. That much was obvious. She just sighed and watched, waiting around. Neither of them were making moves, and based on the Versal's smile, it seemed they really were just conversing. Her desire to hear what they were talking about was palpable. She'd be bothering John later to hear about it. A Versal with talent supposedly equal to John. Phaidon and Tana appeared by her side, Amara's eyes never shifting from John's figure. Tana scoffed. If he's anything like John, it would be impossible for me to hide from him. Stupid Versals. Can either of you feel what authority he is? I'm struggling to, Amara asked, the others throwing scrutinizing glances toward the Versal so far away. Both of them returned shakes of the head. No, which means he's at least above us. Authority 10, definitely. So what are the odds he's able to kill John? 0, probably. John could probably hear the man trying to kill him entire seconds before he even tried. Amara sighed again, feeling more anxious the more they talked. Her eyes never left the two of them. And then, things happened almost too fast for her to make sense of. She saw a flash of energy, a red line being drawn across John's neck. His head tilted, the Versal's hand finally exposing his movement, impossible to react to. Amara felt that sinking feeling in her stomach before she could consciously react to what she saw. Then, she saw the Versal's head explode with light and sparks, half of his head being vaporized before his body suddenly disappeared. John's figure faded away, nothing more than a clone, and then they heard his voice over the TACnet. All units, weapons free. Having waited with bated breath, the army took the opportunity the microsecond John's words ended. Tanks let off their shots in unison, one massive explosion rocking the entire battlefield. Shells slammed into the army, shields on their side raising and shattering just as fast, unable to stop the barrage. Snapping shockwaves of flame washed over the armored royals and corrupted, blowing apart their formation and tossing dozens into the air. But it was only that much, and not even that damage could faze the army. Uncaring of the sudden carnage around them, the armored warriors began their charge. Massive beasts that shook the ground with every step used their incredible strength to stampede straight toward the line of tanks. Shells flew toward them and made constant impacts at rates that seemed almost desperate. Those were supported by incoming missiles that made flashing impacts targeting the strongest of the army, as well as bombs from planes overhead that detonated with incredible flares of mana. It wasn't long before a quarter of the charging army was either annihilated or incapacitated. At the same time, Ironheart stepped forward, those Scourge sovereigns making their move. Only one emerged, a warlock-type sovereign and the sole reason for the barrier around the nexus. It had escaped Ironheart's clutches once. Amara knew that the man had been endlessly irritated by that, as if forcing another sovereign to run for their lives was a disgraceful performance. Ironheart didn't give a single word before disappearing from his position, launching himself over the incoming army and shooting straight toward his target. Just as fast, the barrier around the nexus dropped, the sovereign forced to focus its power as Ironheart slashed at it with a blade of such disgustingly dense vigor that it made the skin on everyone's neck sting, like they had already been cut. Yet, Amara noticed how the other sovereign didn't move, simply waiting, not so much as exerting undue psychic influence on Iron Legion even with John missing. Artillery was finally able to find its home within the nexus itself, shells punching holes through buildings and wreaking havoc. More monsters started to flood through the gates like a disturbed nest of wasps, not enough to be annoying, but enough to add another layer of concern. Amara felt her adrenaline spike as she watched the incoming army. She had seldom been a part of such a frontal battle as this, where every soldier on each side was more equal in strength than otherwise. No longer were they slaughtering hundreds of lesser monsters each, concerned only about energy efficiency. Now, she'd have to hold her own in a free-for-all, every enemy threatening in its own way. They were fighting intelligent soldiers, not mindless monsters. They may have an edge in terms of the quality of their armor and weapons, but it was only that, an edge. It wasn't going to guarantee their lives. For perhaps the first time, these soldiers of Iron Legion would be sustaining losses in direct battle, not merely dying in the crossfire of a sovereign battle. but dying by the blade of another individual, a royal or corrupted. Amara jolted when she saw John appear by her side, scowling at him as he peered down at her from his exosuit. We'll be speaking about this later, husband. I have always enjoyed our talks. He responded as groups of flickers started to inch forward, their faces warped with instinctual hatred. Growls and hisses were hardly audible as the tanks around them continued to fire, unleashing hundreds of shells every minute. Bombs and missiles continued to impact amidst the incoming army, and they continued to charge as if they didn't care. But nothing could completely put them down, and before long, they made contact. The marshals and brigadiers on both sides launched forward to meet each other first, massive clashes of energy rending the ground beneath them and even killing some of the royals nearby. Then, the mass of the Scourge army slammed into the barriers and tanks. John hoisted Totenstall, his finger pulling back the trigger with casual ease, the barrel a bright, glowing orange. Fire spewed as hundreds of rounds riddled the armor of those incoming royals. Their mounts were shredded even behind their armor, the penetrative power of each bullet unable to be stopped and punching through the fleshy bodies underneath. Each bullet left red streaks through the air, drawing lines of death as claw met steel all around them. Amara's eyes widened in adrenaline-backed focus, her heart thrumming with tangible mana as she drew spells before her. Wielding them like a blade, her aura found her first target, a corrupted sitting at authority 9 with a massive axe-wielding arm disproportionate from the rest of its body. Her first spell unleashed a bolt of fire backed by penetrating spatial magic that tore a hole clean through the chest of its grisly mount. When the corrupted jumped off the mount toward her with speed that she could barely keep up with, she created a barrier and leaned to deflect the axe coming toward her chest. The blade met her barrier, and she watched as it was redirected, her barrier cracking in the process. It barely held on long enough for her to complete her dodge and let off her next spell. A lance of compressed fire and air streaked toward the corrupted. She saw it try to contort its body out of the way, yet the lance made contact with the side of its chest anyway. Its armor melted before the two even touched, a hole being blown through by the sheer pressure as the lance pierced its flesh. As soon as it met enough resistance, the lance detonated inside its body, blowing apart its arm and body, both pieces flying apart. She sent another lance at its head for good measure, watching it explode before turning back to the battles around her. She couldn't see Tana. By this point, that girl had managed to reduce even her exposure while making contact with others. The most one could pick out was a flicker of something while her enemy was being decapitated. Fighting was too fast to allow battles to linger. He and Shadowbane both snapped around their opponents with their movement abilities, their attacks backed by that impossible speed and making short work of each royal or corrupted. The rest of their Desert Eagles were busy driving back those that tried to pierce into the ranks of Iron Legion, failing to do so since there were only so many of them. Their battle lines were nearly a mile long, dense with tanks, vehicles, barriers, soldiers, and flickers. But there were only so many specialists among them. Sector 4 had made a direct appearance to aid in the battle, but as above average as they were, these battles couldn't be dictated by a minority, not when the average authority of the enemy army was technically higher than their own. Mounted royals and corrupted were swift to annihilate barriers and punched through, regardless of the expense to do so. Soldiers quickly met their charge, and using the superiority of their armor and weapons, put a stop to their momentum. The two sides locked themselves in fierce battle, human adrenaline matching the ferocity of flicker hatred. Iron Legion was aided by many thousands of ravenous fairy beasts that stopped at nothing to tear apart their nemesis. The Scourge army was outnumbered and outgunned, but as the two sides met, the onslaught of tank fire, bombs, and missiles completely ceased. Redirected toward either the nexus or incoming horde of fodder monsters, the ranks of Iron Legion soldiers were forced to handle the battle directly. After killing another royal, a fight that took nearly a minute, Amara glanced at John. He gunned down everything that got too close with focused fire that nothing short of Authority 9 could resist for longer than a few seconds. Predicting every move of everything around him, nothing could catch him off guard, Psycha palpably radiating off of him and making him a magical beacon that attracted more than it dissuaded. Ha ha ha. She heard his cackle, his Psycha beginning to resonate across the battlefield. Slowly, she started to hear it. Listen to it. Hear the crescendo. For I have led this symphony, so shall this battle follow. Sing for me. Sing for me. She heard his screams, and then heard the symphony. Amara's eyes widened, John's psyche pervading more than just the atmosphere. Nearly unavoidable, she allowed it in, curious instead of vigilant. The music then filled her ears, and she nearly froze as her mind was overwhelmed. Everything had a sound. Each clash of metal blades resonated through her hands. Each scream echoed through her chest. Every movement strained her legs. The entire battlefield was a choir of maniacal screams and otherworldly tongues, yet it exposed to her the flow. That symphony John had referenced incessantly, now before her, exposed her to the truth of the universe. Or, she would describe it as the reality, which meant more than just knowing the here and now. She felt her concept of abstraction tingle. Gifted by the weaver and his tapestry, it had remained entirely dormant until she could breach the Great Barrier. The conceptual remained beyond her, and yet hearing the symphony stirred her mind with the influence of the horizon. She realized now what John had always heard. It was more than just the barrier. She knew his symphony was a consequence of becoming more in tune with the world, a requisite of breaching the Great Barrier. No, this symphony went beyond the Great Barrier. Its chords and times created rivers of comprehension that stretched through the skies. Or perhaps it was the opposite. She decided to follow the tune, listening to her enemy instead of seeing it. She almost didn't understand what she was doing when she did it. A spatial fissure here, a detonation there, some poison all around, and suddenly a dozen royals dropped dead around her. It made her bleed from her ears, and yet the silence of their deaths brought the clarity she was looking for. And she turned her head upward in a moment of realization. Strings descended from the heavens, songs of control, fingers over the instruments, and they led their pawns upon the world like conductors. So fathomless that she would never be capable of comprehending how. Yet she knew by the voice of her soul that her deduction was true. She lost herself in her stare, feeling the voices of the beyond, and eventually, discerning some of the words they uttered upon the lands. And then she was interrupted by a blast of psyche, John's massive armored hand grabbing her armor with enough force to cause her auric senses to flare. Avert your gaze, wife. Shut your ears to that which you shouldn't understand. By our marriage, they cannot inflict upon you curses or afflictions so long as I stand before you. Use my song as a guide in your battle, but no further shall you stray from my influence. I am your husband. Stay by my side. Amara shakily nodded, the voices fading from her mind as she placed John's song at the forefront. She listened to him and refused to delve further. She felt her mind regain clarity, and he released her. He looked straight at her, their faces close when his voice went deep. Welcome to spiritual warfare, Amara. Now, come dance with me. She slowly smiled as his song turned to a serenade, and she felt her mana move in resonance, slaughtering their way through royals together. Chapter 321. What did they do? Why does it feel so weird? Blackblood shouted as he cleaved through yet another royal, their armor already destroyed from repeated attacks by his heavy hand. He scratched his helmeted head before lunging to the side, a dense bolt of serrated metal flying past him from a corrupted. Its grotesque body meandered toward him, and as Blackblood watched it cast more magic, his ears rang with its song. So long as he listened to it, he could predict its actions with near-clairvoyant ease. It hurt his head if he listened too closely, but nonetheless, it made battles significantly easier. His only gripe was how external his actions felt, like the song was guiding his limbs instead of himself. Like the voices he heard drove his brain instead of his own consciousness. He wasn't the only one. Nearby, Aki drove her fingers through the throat of a large grizzly beast, grabbing its spine through its neck and pulling. Overcome with weakness, it died as soon as she removed its bones, her breathing steady, her armor coated in blood and tar from the rain. Inwardly, she could feel a stinging sensation in her brain when she leaned into the song. Using it excessively hurt. Trying to glance beyond it invited disturbing screams from dimensions unknown. Just kill them as fast as possible. John might just kill his soldiers if this fight gets prolonged. They can hear it too, and I don't think they can handle it as well as we can. Jaya shouted while removing more of her alchemical works. Most were explosive in some way. Poisons simply work too slow in a battle like this. Still, Most of her fights lied more in utility than direct killing power. With the onboard enchantments in each Iron Legion standard issue armor system, she could disperse smoke screens and mana disruptors without affecting the troops around her, cutting off her enemies' eyes and senses. She tossed a spatial grenade, watching it make impact with the chest of a royal fighting another soldier. Upon detonation, the grenade collapsed into a spatial fissure, ripping into everything around it, including the royal's chest. It evaporated into nothing, leaving the royal with half a torso and a sliver of life left. That's when her head suddenly spun around, another grenade in her hand when she heard a scream. Hey-ah! Kata flew through the air with that war cry, tackling a random corrupted and landing on the top of a tank. She grabbed its neck with both hands, and with her maniacal grin, started slamming her head into its own. Die, 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 die. Over and over again, she pounded skull against skull, using the metal of the tank as a backplate. Eventually, the corrupted skull gave out first, her forehead caving its face until it finally stopped moving. Aki cringed as she saw a wound open on her face, a laceration from one of the corrupted skull fragments. She wondered why the hell Kata didn't have her helmet on, but was too busy to start reprimanding. Kata lunged toward her next enemy, eager to repeat her new fighting style, not noticing the horrified looks being thrown her way. Quan and Song worked perfectly together, holding down multiple authority 10s by themselves, either outright killing them or buying enough time for some other brigadiers to help them. Their actions were fluid and without the excitement of the rest of the army, their fighting styles turning brutally efficient as time went on. Perhaps the two having the hardest times were Arya and Blackblood. Both utilized similar fighting styles, but whereas Blackblood was lamenting his every life choice that landed him in the middle of a platoon of psychos, Arya was busy mustering every ounce of power and potential within her. Despite both Amara and Aki reassuring Arya multiple times that she continued to remain with the Desert Eagles because she was competent enough, she constantly felt like she lacked the flair they did. Blackblood went out of his way frequently to keep her from changing that, claiming that he needed at least one other normal person on the team with him. But that never helped the feeling of inadequacy she held. Every fight, every battle was an opportunity to prove herself. She pushed her body to the limits constantly, trying things that brought her close to death's door regularly, yet were actions that held the creativity that would propel her abilities forward. Thankfully, she had plenty of inspiration to pull from, being around so many eccentrics and anomalies. When her axe cleaved down, it hit the chest of her enemy and then exploded, vigor tearing it to shreds, a new hole in its body. She was as explosive with her movements as her vigor was. She didn't need to be as fast as Phaidon or Shadowbane, but what she lacked in speed, she made up for in weight. Besides, it wasn't like she didn't have her own ace. Her axe glowed with a bloody light as she felled more enemies. Its hunger for the carnage she wrought grew, especially as she put more strain on herself. The axe could feel her desperation, and it fueled it. Her mental acuity grew alongside her bloodlust. It never stood out in battles like these, where everyone was thirsting for every last scourge kill. But as John had told her not long ago, her axe was a tool to sharpen her intent. The Bloodsworn had always been a mystery to her, until the past few months when John had requested to study the axe while they were in between battles. That study of his lasted all but 2 days before he returned it. The verdict? The axe could feed on the Magica within blood to amplify her vigor, a function she had already guessed. But the secondary functions were entirely psychic. The bloodlust she felt, the desire for slaughter, the way her mind focused and honed around her enemies, was all by the design of the axe. After informing her of this information, he had left some advice regarding its usage. As much as it could overwhelm her should she let it, the Bloodsworn was as much of a tool as it was a weapon. While made with the intent to kill, its functions could be exploited for her own gain. As it turns out, the power it granted her wasn't necessarily exclusively amplification, but also came in the form of a channeled mental state. Did it make her bloodthirsty? Of course. Did it also turn her into an efficient killing machine? Absolutely. John told her that there was much to learn from it, and that the day she could wield the mental acuity that the Bloodsworn granted her without the axe, and its emotional afflictions would be the day she found her niche. For now, she fell into the flow of her slaughter, the songs of the enemies around detonating with satisfying shockwaves. The battle continued to rage, and for a time, it seemed like Iron Legion had lost its edge. Despite being able to annihilate a large chunk of the army before it could reach them, despite having high Magitech armor and gear, and despite being augmented by John's army-wide mental radio, the Scourge had pierced their defenses and were doing what they did best. Given so many tools to lean on, the soldiers had lost the edge that Kingdom forces had. No longer being forced to risk your life while sitting behind entire feet of steel for months at a time wasn't good for keeping sharp, no matter how motivated you were when the time came to get your hands dirty. And yet, even that had been compensated for. Flickers filled every inch of space between the soldiers. These veteran beasts were just as in their element as the Scourge was. Not only that, but there had been no shortage of bonds being made over the months of the campaign. So many Flickers and humans being in close proximity, fighting alongside each other, socializing, and becoming familiar had resulted in many pairs initiating bonding rituals. Several hundred Flickers had become companions to the soldiers of Iron Legion, and the only reason that number wasn't higher was because most of the Flickers were older, more intelligent, set in their ways, and unwilling to go so far. There was a reason it was optimal to bond with them while they were young. With no impressions made, they could easily grow to like their master like a normal pack-bonded animal. Still, the benefits the companion Flickers received were often substantial. A bonded human was an invaluable lifeline, a way to escape, a partner to rely on, and most importantly, a power source to grow from. Flickers always adjusted to the power level of their master, and more often than not, that meant they got stronger. Whether it was by sheer strength or by simply absorbing their master's magic, the gains weren't to be underestimated. Which meant even if Iron Legion soldiers had lost their edge, they were more than compensated for. Nevertheless, losses were sustained. The Scourge cared little for their lives if it meant they could bring humans down with them, and Royals and Corrupted only had a slightly greater sense of self-preservation. Their lives were dedicated to taking others. They would live for that purpose until the time came to give their lives for that purpose. Soldiers fell all around the tanks, body parts strewn about as monster and beast tore each other to shreds. More monsters continued to flood from the city as Royals tried to break down Iron Legion formations. But the tanks kept their cannons trained on the masses ahead. As if uncaring about their brothers nearby, they kept their firepower forward, killing as many monsters as possible before they could reach them. Close air support assisted to this end, while artillery and bombing runs engaged the nexus beyond, leveling buildings, no sovereign there to protect it. Ironheart's battle was no less fierce than any other. Both he and his enemy had already engaged before, both sides understanding just about every card the other had to play. But the wound to Ironheart's pride could only be healed in this battle, and he engaged with such intensity that others might think his life hinged on whether he could kill his enemy before it could escape again. And yet, all the while, even as the battle approached its climax, that second Scourge sovereign refused to make a move. John found a brief moment of respite, gazing toward the nexus. He felt another gaze point back at his, the two communicating in ways others couldn't understand. "You're smart, but are you sure your hesitation will matter?" He chuckled from behind his helmet. He knew that the other sovereign was unsure. There was one glaring question that he knew was racking its mind well before the battle even started. Why would John engage two sovereigns with just one? It was suicide, unless he had another sovereign to help him. It would only make sense that he did. That would be the only reason he would ever consider engaging in this battle. The chances he was bluffing about having another sovereign on standby was abysmally low. Yet, there was no other sovereign that could be detected for hundreds of miles. There were only 3 sovereigns present, and 2 of them were doing battle. The others sat within the holds of the Nexus, scattering dense pulses of Psyche, utilizing every conceptual tool it had in order to find that other sovereign, only to turn up with absolutely nothing. But it refused to believe John was bluffing. Therefore, the only other conclusion was that the sovereign he had called on was so strong as to be undetectable to even it. There were only a handful of those in the world, a handful of sovereigns that could escape the conceptual detection of not just itself, but the kings. Still on the continent, anarchy could sense all sovereigns upon it, only except for those that could escape even anarchy's detection. So if there had been no warning about another sovereign being present to help Iron Legion, its ultimate conclusion was correct. and that meant the only thing keeping it alive was its inactivity. After that, the only question it had to answer was how long it had to live anyway. Would it be allowed to escape? Was there any reason to allow that? Where was John's supremely powerful help? And if its fate was sealed anyway, why hadn't they engaged yet? Perhaps it was being searched for. Just because two sovereigns knew that the other was there didn't mean they could see through the labyrinth of power around each other. While the sovereign didn't have access to the psychic conceptual, it was still surrounded by the most complex arrays of biological computational systems on the continent. The place was so tangible with Psyche that one could see it around them in the air. It was a fluid thicker than air, the movement of a hand stirring up visible currents. And it was laced with illusions and mazes of neural activity. Quadrillions of computations were firing off across the complex every second, all of them drawing paths across biological networks that branched beyond the nexus and through the vessels of the continent. To those incapable, it was impossible to get anywhere close to the sovereign without being able to decipher illusion from reality. They'd have their nervous systems fried just by walking near. If a knight or warlock were trying to find it, well, even a sovereign among them would have a hard time. That meant it had time, so long as it didn't engage beyond its nexus. That would draw a clean path straight back to it. So it remained within its holds, simply watching, making plans for the future, and sending them across dedicated neural lines deep underground that pointed back towards Scourge territory. And John watched it, his eyes piercing through the walls of the nexus to see the intangible structures of Psyche deep within. It was an intellectual fortress, like his mind palace, but less refined, filled with thousands of subminds instead of just one. And he laughed. He laughed as jets streaked overhead. He laughed as the blades on his arms sheared through the flesh of his enemies, tearing them apart while he felt Psyche course through the mechanical limbs of his exosuit. He laughed as artillery and bombs sent constant shockwaves across the battlefield. He laughed as tanks fired, as flickers snarled and launched toward their prey, as royals screamed and cut at his soldiers, as waves of dimensional frequencies and psychic powers resonated across the landscape, as his desert eagles listened to his song and engaged with impunity, as helicopters let loose volleys of missiles and gunfire over their heads, as other companies of tanks moved away from the formation to begin flanking maneuvers, as Ironheart battled that sovereign and cleaved scars into the planet below. Even as a super-heavy tank, weighing 640,000 pounds, was tossed dozens of yards away by the crossfire of a fight between marshals. Amara felt her heart sink as that tank landed in the midst of a crowd. Most were able to evade since a flying super-heavy tank was pretty obvious, but others weren't as lucky. And yet she saw John laugh. Yes. This is it. He jammed Totenstall's nearly molten barrel into the skull of a corrupted, putting a dozen rounds through it before ripping it out and jumping. He landed on top of a command tank, his boots crashing against steel. Totenstall no longer fired, John gazing across the entire battlefield. His song changed. Amara could feel it. She gazed upon him, feeling the satisfaction of every instrument playing in harmony. Every piece of his puzzle was in place. Every pawn in his game was making the movies he dictated they would. His army moved by his rhythm, and Amara could sense the flow of the troops around her. They didn't speak. The TACnet was nearly dead. Every voice that did echo through was lethally calm, speaking of their maneuvers like they were a boring routine instead of strategic movements that were manipulating the tide of battle. She smiled when she felt it, smiled when she felt John's ecstasy. This battle was a culmination. Months of constant campaigning across the northern regions of the continent, sweeping through Scourge territory and annihilating all in their way, were coming to a head here. The army was flowing like they never had before. Everyone, even the flickers, were playing their part perfectly. Even the individual battles were moving according to John's intent. Victory was merely the end of a symphony being played, and John's orchestra was in perfect tune and time. Catching himself, John began firing Totenstall once more, his target priority flowing with the tide of battle. Amara watched him as he fought, royals and monsters alike clawing their way toward him for any chance to kill the commander of Iron Legion. They couldn't know that he was the most protected one on the battlefield. His symphony dictated so, and he continued laughing, screaming out to the world, his voice audible to those listening to his song. This is what I've told you about. By my grand design, this is what I've created. I have manufactured this war. as I told you I would. Look at my beautiful tanks, and my harmonious birds in the sky. Get up here, Nanan. Come gaze upon my work. Did I not tell you my tanks would change the face of warfare? John turned around, glancing between the groups of his troops. Amara watched him, hearing his song start to shift with a growing pit in her stomach. Nanan, hurry your sorry ass over here. I need to tell you about my favorite piece of engineering on these things, and you're not allowed to ignore my comms this time. I'll even share one of my sandwiches with you. Amara started running as he spoke, hearing a voice whisper in her ear from beyond the mortal plane, flickers of someone's figure appearing in her mind. She jumped, air magic carrying her and lowering her to the top of the tank John stood on. He spoke to her when she arrived. Amara, good timing. Can you help me find Nanan? Do you know where he went? Matter of fact, I can't find any of the doves. Did they head off with the flanking force? John, She choked on her words, those whispers in her mind resurfacing, overpowering the explosions coming from the nearby cannons. Then, when she finally spoke, her words came with the same power of the voices from above. It's glorious, John. I knew you'd pull it off. Words not her own left her mouth, John slowly turning his head toward her. I was right. You were worth it. So keep fighting, and we'll all be watching over you, the last snow dove. The whispers faded from Amara's mind, John's song going mute. She heard the drops of rain more than she heard bombs in the distance as she watched John fall to a knee. As fast as he ripped off his helmet, she cast her barrier over them, washing the air and protecting him from the tar. And yet it proved to be unnecessary. Only a few drops struck her barrier before light began to seep through the clouds, splitting them apart and putting a stop to the rain. I forgot, John muttered, his face twisted in pain. I can't believe I forgot them. What is happening to me? I'm sorry, Nanan. I forgot. I can't believe I forgot. He groaned in pain, Amara standing there, not knowing what to do as she watched her husband unfold. Then, he looked up at her, with a look in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a year. Amara, I haven't slept in months. Please, when this battle is over, get me to Maxwell. I need his help, otherwise I'll be fucked for my next advancement. I've already got tongues echoing through my mind palace. His words drifted off, a few seconds going by before he suddenly slipped his helmet back on. Totenstall glowed with greater fury. I'll need to speak to Maxwell, wife. I just need to make sure I'm protected when I do. He's wielded the powers of the outer waters before, after all. He stepped back up to his feet, letting out a long sigh. Then he turned back to the battle, his song phasing back into her mind. Ah, what a wonderful tune. I can't believe I almost disturbed it. Hopefully Anderson will move soon. I'd like to peer into that nexus personally. Amara felt herself cry as she watched his back, her teeth grinding against each other as wrathful hatred bubbled within her. What did those monsters do to my fucking husband?